Patrik-Ian Polk, welcome to AAFCA Presents Pride 2020. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So we have been celebrating all things LGBTQ all month long, all throughout June. And we're so super excited to be chatting with you about your amazing career as a filmmaker, as a content creator, and as a trailblazer. I know that this week you had some really big news to come out about your series, Noah's Ark, and really excited about that.
Yeah, we announced just yesterday. So yeah, we're very excited to be getting the band back together.
Absolutely. So 2020, kind of started off a little rocky. Miss Rona kind of came in and messed things up a little bit. But this is a very special year for you. It's the anniversary year for you, the 20th anniversary of your groundbreaking film, Punks. And, that really was how we were introduced to your artistry and to who you are as this great content creator. But before we even go into that, Patrick, I kind of want to go all the way back, like all the way back to the young man that was growing up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And when did you discover that you wanted to be this amazing storyteller?
I I think I always was into creative writing as a child, and at a certain point, though, I probably this would have been like early junior high, like seventh grade. I remember making I remember writing because I come home from school sometimes with my grandmother, and of course, what soap operas would be on as a small child. And so I remember writing like a soap in like spiral notebooks, and but I would use the names of my friends as the characters. And it was very much, it was very over the top and kind of like dramatic and very much in the vein of, Dynasty or Dallas or the soap operas or whatever. Um, and I remember us videotaping, a friend had a video camera, and I remember us videotaping, an episode. Um, so at a certain point, I was, trying to do things, I guess. And then sometimes, as crude as they kind of were, and then sometime after that, Spike Lee emerged on the scene, and I sort of that kind of cemented the idea. Okay, filmmaking, that's what this is, and a director, that's what this is called, and film school, that's where you go to do it. That's what Spike Lee did, because he was the first Black person that I knew. So yeah, and then from that point on, like junior high, it became like, okay, this is what the plan is. This is what I will do. So I just knew, okay, I'm going to film school. So that became the goal, and then that's what I did.
You eventually graduated from USC and landed a job at MTV. You also got an opportunity to work with Kenneth Babyface Edmonds and his wife Tracy Edmonds. And if I recall from an interview that I was watching as I was doing research about you, that they actually helped fund the first film, Punks. And so, what were some of the lessons that you learned working with them? Because they really were a part of creating images for African Americans, I'd say probably around the late 90s, early 2000s. So, what did you learn as an aspiring filmmaker while working with them?
Well, I think I came out of film school, and I kind of fell into this role as a production executive at MTV, and then with Babyface and Tracy. And I think, the thing that was amazing about them is that they were Hollywood royalty. Um, he could not have been more mainstream at the time. He hadn't even really peaked. He was still peaking. But he was so massive. And they were just these really down to earth, smart, fun people that really had these ambitious, um, So it just kind of continued my, educational experience, what I call like sort of learning how movies get made from inside the Hollywood system, starting at MTV and Paramount, and then continuing with Edmonds and at 20th Century Fox. It was just really cool to see Black creatives sort of controlling this whole situation, wielding their power, telling Black stories, soul food and all of that. I mean, it was just really cool. And then they were just cool people. So they were just fun. They liked to travel, and then they would take us with them. And they were just active. A lot of times you'll talk to people who work with celebrity production company figureheads or whatever. They're not very active in the companies. They're kind of in name only, and then they have people that run it for them. But they lived and breathed it. It was really Tracy's vision. She had the vision to go into film and television. She was a genuine producer. And so it was just great to be with people that were that ambitious and that hardworking and that successful. And then to have them believe in me enough to finance Punks, because they didn't help pay for it. They paid for it. They wrote a check. This groundbreaking gay movie, nothing like it had ever been done. So, and like I said, he could not have been more sort of mainstream Black America. So it was a risk. It was a risky move when you really think about it, but they didn't flinch. They loved the idea. Then to my shock, they loved the script. When I first gave them the script, they were going away for a vacation with their family, I think to Greece or something. And they came back, and I just knew they were going to say no after reading it and seeing, okay, it really is a gay script. But they came back and they were like, the script had been passed through the entire family. Like the brother had read it, the mother, the uncle, the son, and everyone really loved it. They thought it was so funny, and they were in. So it was a great experience. Tracy and I are still close to this day. I'm writing a TV movie for Lifetime right now that she's producing. That was wonderful.
Wow. And so if you will, can you take us back to, I guess, when you were thinking about Punks and what inspired those characters? Because when I saw the film, that for me was the first time that I really got to see all levels or all representations of the LGBTQ community. Each character sort of represented a certain person. I felt like in the film, you had Jasmine, you had Seth Gilliam's character, you had your gigolo lover, and then you also had the Latin representation. And so to me, that was, again, like you said, very groundbreaking. The first time that we had ever seen those images, yet alone all four of them represented in that. So what inspired those characters and the story?
Well, I had, this was early in my MTV days, so I was just out of film school. I had written the script for a movie that I would end up doing like 20 years later, Blackbird. I'd written that script, sort of coming out of film school. And it had gotten a lot of positive notice, responses, but, it was this Black gay movie. Nobody was going to make it. Back then, this was like in the early 90s. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to write as I was working at MTV, developing movies like Beavis and Butthead and Election, and a filmmaker that I met at the time who had written a movie called Stonewall, not the Stonewall that came out more recently. That one was pretty much trash, but the original Stonewall from the 90s is amazing. People, you should go find that movie and watch it. But this Black gay British screenwriter had written that movie, and so we had met, and I had a very fast affinity towards him, and we became friends. And he became a bit of a mentor, older brother type, because he was this sort of very fabulous, flamboyant, Black British, openly gay and loud about it, amazing artist. And so he said something to me. I was like, I'm trying to figure out what to write next. Blackbird has gotten some good notices, but, no one really wants to make this movie. And he said the words to me that have stayed throughout my career, which he said very simply, write the story that only you can tell. And that kind of solidified it for me. You know, it was like, okay, well, the story that I can tell. I think Waiting to Exhale had happened and was a big hit around that time. And I thought, I want to see a movie like that about gay people. And I had a roommate at the time, not roommate, but my best friend at the time was this young, beautiful, like gorgeous, dark-skinned, muscular Black man in West Hollywood, who was, while we were friends, was diagnosed as HIV positive. And so I kind of witnessed him go from like suddenly getting sick once and then being in the hospital, not knowing what's wrong, to kind of wondering if he had it, and then telling me how like the nurse, no one came and told him he had tested positive, and he asked the nurse, did they ever get the results back? And she kind of very matter-of-factly rattled off like, oh yeah, they didn't tell you, yeah, you're positive or whatever, like it was nothing, you know. But I watched him sort of get diagnosed, deal with it, you know, all the, back then it was like, it wasn't 1 pill a day, it was like 10 pills a day, and half of them made you ill, and these made you not be able to sleep, and this did this. So I watched him kind of struggle with all of that, managing it, figuring it out, while maintaining, you know, this gorgeous cover boy, muscly body, continuing to live and love and constantly picking up men and just doing it, you know, like a young 20-something Black gay man would. And I wanted to tell that story because at the time, all we had seen, I mean, we were just kind of coming out of the really horrible period of the AIDS epidemic. And so it was becoming less of a death sentence by that point. But there was still a lot of fear and stigma, and everything that we saw represented was, you know, an early Frost, if you remember that movie. It was all about dying and death, and that's all you saw about AIDS. And that was not the experience that I witnessed with my friends. So I'm like, this is a story. This story needs to be told. He's a regular person who just happens to have HIV, and he is living and loving like, you know, everybody else. So it was kind of like, it was sort of like this idea that, okay, there's never been anything like this. So how do I tell, you know, multiple stories in one go? You know, how do I tell, you know, Marcus was more like my story at the time. I was kind of very shy and not very experienced, very terrified of AIDS and HIV. And that really did kind of affect how I went about trying to navigate a dating and sex life in my early 20s. And so I thought that's an interesting story that should be told. That's something that we're dealing with. And then my friend, the same friend who inspired the HIV storyline, took me to a drag show at Rage once. And I saw Jasmine, because he was friends with Jasmine. And I saw Jasmine perform. He was like, you got to see my friend. And Jasmine did this Janet Jackson number. And I think it was the performance, the MTV video where she does like a slowed down. She does, it's If, and that's the way love goes in If. She's got on the jeans and the bustier and the curly hair. But anyway, Jasmine does this performance, and it was like, and I've been seeing drag since I was like a teenager, sneaking away from Hattiesburg with my friends, you know, driving up to Jackson to go to Bill's or the Interchange, as it was called at some point, to see the drag queens perform. But I'd never seen anything like this. Jasmine really turned it. It was really like, it was like watching Janet Jackson. She had choreography. She did all the choreography. She had dancers behind her, the costumes, and it was just such an overtly fabulous version of drag that I thought, oh, I want to represent that. Because the other thing about drag that used to be sort of typical is it was played for comedic effect always, you know, especially white drag queens. It was just always over the top, garish, and it was just meant to be funny. And the drag queens that I saw, even in Mississippi, going up and singing. These men who were like garbage truck drivers and school bus drivers and sort of very like janitors and things like very sort of like lower working class jobs, then would come into these gay clubs. And this is in Mississippi, mind you, in like the 80s. So this is not where they could be like fabulous and open and out and stuff. So this was their outlet to come. They work these, menial jobs in the daytime and then come and give you, fabulous costumes and performances and stuff. And I remember seeing P.D. LaBelle, who was a Patti LaBelle impersonator, and Raven and Crystal St. James and put your hands together, Miss Smokey, and they were fabulous. And then to see Jasmine, which kind of took what they did and then took it to another level with dance and choreography and all this Hollywood stuff, I was like, I want to see that. And so the other character became Chris, who was actually named after Crystal St. James from Mississippi. She was in a troupe with these other drag queens, and they had fabulous choreography and fabulous costumes and all this stuff. It was very much like Showgirls. And then I thought for some diversity, let's have a Latin character. Actually, I wasn't thinking diversity. That was not it. I take that back. My dear friend, Wilson Cruz and I had somehow, I to this day don't know how we met, became friends when the My So-Called Life phenomenon was happening. So literally, he's like 23, I think I'm 22. I'm at MTV, he's going through this My So-Called Life thing, and we're just like, wow, these two queer kids like having the time of our lives in Hollywood. And so naturally, I wrote a part for Wilson because I thought there should be a Latin character and my friend should play it. Wilson ended up not being able to do it because he booked Party of Five, a series, and it was like, look, do my little independent film. No, you need to go do, Party of Five. And so I ended up getting Renely, who had been in like Con Air and all that stuff. And it was Babyface who would say like, oh, what about that dude? Remember in Con Air, the guy who's jogging in the dress through the desert? And I was like, oh yeah. Who happens to always also be the kid who, Michelle Pfeiffer took out to dinner in Dangerous Liaisons. Not Dangerous Liaisons, Dangerous Minds. And so, that's kind of how it all came together. The idea was to represent as broad a cross-section as I could, but a lot of it was, again, with punks, I was writing what I knew. That was the sort of goal. And so these were the things that I knew. These were the things that I was seeing at the time, if that makes sense. So that's kind of really organically how punks came to be. Yeah.
And I must say the scene with Marcus, played by Seth Gilliam, when he goes to get tested with Loretta Devine, it is absolutely hilarious. There were so many funny moments. The scene where he meets the Rockman Dunbar character, and there's the muscles, and he's on the truck, which I actually had a similar experience in my real life, and I immediately thought about that when my neighbor moved in as well. That film laid the foundation for Noah's Ark, which would come a couple of years later. And that's also celebrating, as we mentioned at the top, the 15th anniversary this year. And that was really the first, and I think it's still the only remaining show that was on television on a cable network that focused on the Black gay male experience. And so how did punks inspire Noah's Ark? And what were your thoughts when you were creating that show? Because that was, again, you were breaking ground.
Well, I had, punks got into Sundance, which was a huge deal. And then, okay, so Sundance was sort of, at its height, Sundance was responsible for breaking all these amazing careers and filmmakers and stuff, but really, white men. And so if you got a film in Sundance, doors of Hollywood kind of opened for you, but not if you were Black. And so unfortunately, it was like Punks, you know, we came out, we had this great premiere at Sundance, but Hollywood didn't really embrace the film. Like we had problems finding a distributor. Ended up, you know, kind of having to go with this sort of new independent Black distributor coming, Urban World Film Festival. They were kind of getting into distribution. So it was just a small situation. You know, the film kind of never really got its due in that regard, which made it difficult. But I had decided after those 6-7 years of being a film executive that when Punks came out, I would leave that job and be a writer director full time. So, and I sold a show idea, TV project to MTV, the network, right out of that situation through my contacts at MTV from having worked there. And it was a show based on I'd written a feature script about 4 Black kids at a predominantly white college, kind of mirroring my experience. 3 guys and a girl. One of the guys was gay. And we were developing it as a series. I spent the better part of a year developing this, writing multiple episodes, and then MTV decided not to make it. And so that was my first sort of industry development experience, because Punks was just, I wrote it, they paid for it, we shot it. There was no real development process. And so it's really frustrating as in someone who was starting out really as just an independent artist, kind of doing my own thing, to put all that work into something and not have it get made was like devastating. And so sometime right after that, I'm trying to think in terms of the timeline of exactly, yeah, because Punks hit Sundance in 2000, was released commercially in late 2000, November 2001 at the Quad and all that. And then 2002, I left my job at Edmonds, spent 2002, 2003 developing the Ghetto Suite at MTV. And then in 2004, like springtime, I think it was, 2 things happened that led to the creation of Noah's Ark. The first one was Phil Wilson founded the Black AIDS Institute, and because the AIDS epidemic in the Black community was just going crazy, and the powers that be, the government, they were not doing enough. And so Phil started the Black AIDS Institute, and he had a weekend conference in LA. It was at I don't know what hotel it was back then. It's now the London Hotel in West Hollywood. And what he did is he brought together Black gay men from not just sort of the HIV field, but medicine, business, media, creatives, all these different fields to come together to brainstorm ways that the Black AIDS Institute could address the HIV epidemic in the Black gay community specifically. And so it was a whole weekend of, you know how these things go, you know, they break you up into teams and stuff, ideas, and all this stuff. It was great. But the thing I took away from that was, oh, wow, there's a network of Black gay men who are successful, who have all this money, like professors and doctors and Wall Street people and da-da-da. Like, that was the main thing, was that, oh, there's a group of these people. So that was in the back of my mind, like, oh, wow. Then maybe some weeks later, it was Black Gay Pride in LA, which is July 4th weekend. It used to be much bigger than it is now. It was called At the Beach. It used to be really big. And so it was the kickoff night, Friday night, which was this party at the El Rey Theater on Wilshire Boulevard called Boy Trade, it was called. And I remember getting to the El Rey, and the El Rey is where we filmed all the scenes, the club scenes in Punks, like with the sisters performing and stuff. So it's a beautiful theater, with a bit of a sunken dance floor in the middle. So I walked into the theater, standing in the back, looking down sort of on this sort of sunken dance floor, trying to see if I can see my friends. And then it suddenly hit me, because it was this club packed with Black LGBTQ people celebrating the start of Black Pride weekend. So literally, it came to mind, oh, these Black people, these Black LGBT people, these people have money. A lot of people are traveling here from all over the country. They're renting cars and hotel rooms and stuff and having this whole weekend. Nobody's doing programming for this group. I'm going to do a show, a Black gay Sex in the City. And I'm not going to Hollywood because Hollywood's not going to do it, but I'm just going to make it. And then we'll just do it episode by episode, and I'll market it directly to this group. Because if everybody here bought a copy, I'd have enough money to shoot something. And then I can shoot the next one. And then they buy that one, and then I'll shoot the next one. So that was the plan. So that was Friday night. I mean, I look back on all this stuff and I just think, Jesus Christ, I have no idea where all this audaciousness, whatever the fuck you want to call it, came from. Because it just seems insane that I would even think that this could be done back then. But nevertheless, so Monday, there's like backstage, it's like this trade paper, and people put casting notices, like legit casting notices, everything to student films, theater, small theater, everything could be in there. So actors, whether you were in SAG or not, starting out or not, you could find something that maybe you could submit for. I put a notice in backstage that Monday. I wrote it. I didn't have a title. I called the show. The show was called Hot Chocolate. And I created these archetypes, like these are the characters. And Noah's name was Jermaine. I remember that. Alex, Ricky, Chance's name was Solomon. Yeah. So it's like Jermaine, Alex, Ricky, Solomon, something like that. And I kind of came up with these character types and descriptions. Had not written script one. Put the notices out that Monday. And so casting started coming in. And back then, there was no email and shit like it is now, not as much. So these were physical headshots that I was getting in the mail, just dozens and dozens of them. So then I was like, oh shit, I've got to write something. So what the fuck is this show? And I had this, oh Jesus Christ. I can't believe I'm going to tell the story, but it should be on record somewhere, I suppose. So, okay. So what happened was, while I was working for Babyface at Edmonds, they had a deal at Fox. And I won't get too much into the minutiae and the detail. I'll just say, through work, I met this guy who was kind of making a way into the entertainment industry, but he came from the sports world. And he had kind of made a big mark in the sports world and gotten the attention of Hollywood. And so through my connections with Edmonds and Fox and stuff, we met and became friends, because it turned out I had encountered him when I was at MTV. And he had sent in kind of a blind submission of an independent film he had made or something. And I being on the low end of the executive totem pole, was tasked with dealing with those kinds of submissions. And I was very kind to him. And apparently nobody else in Hollywood was kind to him. And so he remembered that. He was like, oh my God, you were really nice to me and I'd never forget it. I'm moving to LA. I'd love to take you out to dinner, to lunch, to say thank you. Went out to lunch and we became friends. And he ended up getting a deal at the studio as well. So we were like industry friends and stuff, and we would hang out. And he was this athlete, professional athlete, right? Straight. But he was like, he just seemed very intrigued by me. We were friends. I was kind of oblivious to it until he said, oh, I want to go out. Like, I want to go out to one of your spots. Take me to see, like, where do you go out? And I was like, oh, okay. So I took him to this club. I don't remember what it was. What was it called? It was like an 80s club. It was really fun. And it was that club that's up, used to be, they've torn the whole complex down now, across the street from the Abbey, like the factory it was called, the whole big complex. But it was the part that was upstairs that more recently was called the Penthouse. Back then, I forget what it was called. But they had an 80s night, and I forget what that club was called. It was Wednesdays, and I took him. And we're at this club, and I didn't drink at the time. So I'm about 24, 25. I did not drink at all. So, or I had just started drinking at the age of 25. So I'm probably about 26. And he's drinking Jack and Cokes like they're water and buying them for me. So I'm like, oh, okay. Trying to sort of, because at this point, whenever it was, Janet Jackson's Velvet Rope was out. And I was like, it's time for me to shed my skin and not be this shy boy. And Free Zone was the song. I'm going to be free. And so I started drinking at 25 and all this stuff. So I'm trying to, whatever. So by the second Jack and Coke, I am 3 sheets to the wind. But it's 80s. The music is great. I'm having a great time. And at one point, he says to me, as we're standing at the bar, I don't know what it is about you, but I find you really enticing. I think he said sexually enticing. And now I'm drunk, so I'm not sure I'm hearing it. I can't really tell. And I was like, huh, what'd you say? It's loud. And he's like, and he said that he repeated it. And I said, and I wasn't completely processing exactly what it was, because I was so naive back then that it was like, if you told me you were purple, I'm okay, you're purple. If you tell me you're straight, you are straight. I do not question. And then I think I will not forget it, the Glamorous Life came on, and I was like, oh my God, Sheila, let's go dance. He was dancing. He had his shirt off by that point, all sweaty and hot. I mean, hot. And I remember some of my friends were there, and I remember seeing them at the bar, like looking, because they were like, oh my God, ooh, girl, he is so fine. What is this? And I was like, oh, he's straight, blah, blah, blah. So we're out on the floor. He has his shirt off. He reaches down and pulls my shirt off. And all I remember looking over, and I'm like this, and then I just kind of go with it because I'm drunk. And then I remember looking over, and my friends at the bar were like, their mouths were hanging open, because the idea of me taking my shirt off in public was like, holy cow, what is going on? So, so he drives me home. We're sitting in his car outside my apartment in West Hollywood, and he repeats what he had said at the club. He's like, so, I find you really sexually enticing. But he goes on to say, but I'm straight, right? And I'm like, yeah, because by this time I'm really like drunk, ready to get into my bed. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, yeah. And he's like, so for anything to happen between us, there would have to be a woman involved. And so it kind of hangs in the air. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. I didn't really and he's like, so I have this girl from Vegas, she's coming to visit, and I think she would love you. So like, if you're down, like we could all hang out or something, I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Go inside, wake up the next morning, hungover, and I'm like, do I remember what I think I remember? Is this what happened? And I did remember what I thought I remembered. And so basically what ended up happening, when I sat down to write Noah's Ark, however many years later now this was, and I was trying to think of a story, this sort of significant and very fucked up relationship that I had with this straight athlete turned whatever, at the time I think was probably my most significant adult relationship, like where I kind of fell the hardest and had the hardest time getting over, because he wasn't really gay. And so it was one of those kind of situations. The threesome never happened. It's this thing in real life. So I took the sort of heart of that story and put it onto Noah's Ark. So Noah's hanging out, and I wrote a short film. That's what I wrote, so I had to come up with something really quickly. And in the short film, Noah is hanging out with has been hanging out with this screenwriter that he has met at a screening. And um, they're going on their first date. Because he knows he's gay by this point. They've been going out in this short. And the friends are advising him on what you should do. Don't sleep with them, you know, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't have a condom, and so they're going to try to sleep together in the short film. I lifted that and ended up using it in the actual show where he goes into the bathroom and calls the friends. So all that's in the short. Basically, I took that whole sort of origin story from my own life where he meets Wade. Wade says, oh, I want to go, let's go out. And then, oh no, I want to go to one of your spots. And I was like, oh, okay. They're sitting in that thing Noah has on, that camouflage outfit. And then he takes him to the club. The friends are all like, wait, he wants to go to a gay club? Oh, he gay, girl, please. And then in the club, he takes the shirt off. He says, I find you really sexually enticing. He says the whole spiel to Noah in the club, but there has to be a woman involved or whatever. Only in Noah's Ark, they actually attempt the threesome. I kind of took it, you know, obviously to the next level. So that's kind of how Noah's Ark began, and then how it started to take shape. You know, we shot that first short, then the response was like crazy. It crashed the website. And when I looked at the metrics, the views were like literally from all over the world. And there were like a ton of views from like foreign US military bases. Like I could literally see, you could see a map of everywhere people were watching your shit. It was incredible to me. That's when I was like, oh shit, there really is an audience for this thing. Like there are people that want to see this. I'm not the only one. So I quickly got the guys together and we shot the second little short right in my dining room against this metal wall I had in the design, and threw that up. And it was just a video. It was just the guys standing in the various couples talking to each other about their relationships and stuff. And then at the end of it, they start kissing. And then it's this long montage of all these couples and they are like going in. And it was set to this Janet Jackson, unreleased like Janet Jackson song called Could This Be Love? So that one had good response. And then I made a short where it was the guys doing a direct address to the camera, telling the story of Noah and Wade. So Noah's like, so I met this guy, right? And then Wade's like, yeah, so I met this guy. I mean, but he's not really gay. I'm straight, but you know. And then the friends chime in, please, Wade is gay, and Noah's a fool, and and he goes back and forth, and you see all the characters, and you set up the whole story. So then I took that, and this is how Phil Wilson ties in. I went back and thought, okay, what do I do with this? And I said, oh, there's this network of Black gay men that have all this money. So I took the shorts and I went to this group. You know, I had all the contact info, and I got about 18 different people, some of whom were at this thing, some of whom brought people in, referred people, 18 different people who donated, invested, you know, I think a total of about $90,000. So I had $90,000 to shoot this pilot. Like I said, I wrote the whole pilot. I based it on that origin story that I had experienced with this athlete. And then shot the pilot completely independently, put the crew together. I think the same DP who had shot Punks, who I'd gone to film school with, shot the pilot. You know, everybody chipping in and working together to make it happen. Rodney, who plays Alex, played a small part in Punks that he came to because, so remember how I said I wanted to show like choreography and all this stuff. So Jasmine could really dance. So I wanted the other 3 drag queens had to be able to dance as well, which is why I couldn't cast real drag performers. We had to cast real industry dancers who could do, because I wanted choreography. So I had, the choreographer was like an award-winning choreographer who did like real, like, you know, shit. So I had these three dancers, one of whom was Gene Anthony Ray of fame, the Gene Anthony Ray. And he was friends with the choreographer, Marguerite Derricks. And Marguerite came to the show because she was in a relationship at the time with Melvin Edmonds, Kenny's brother from After Seven, the lead singer from After Seven. And so Kenny was like, oh, Marguerite really wants to choreograph this. Can you, and she was like, she literally was an Emmy Award winning choreographer. So I was like, sure, of course. She was on Fame as well, I think, as a young woman. So she and Gene were really good friends. So she had suggested him, and I was like, of course, Gene Anthony Ray, absolutely. When we were ready to start filming, Gene, apparently who had this history of, unfortunately, of drug issues, fell off the wagon, went nowhere to be found. And Marguerite came to me and told me this, as we had just started filming. So, I don't know what to do. He's disappeared. No one can find him. We don't know. And then sort of last minute, they kind of located him. But she told me, he's trying to get it together. He's pulling himself together. And then I remember Tracy and I having to go to a dance studio in the Valley to see, because they were rehearsing, because they had like 7 numbers. It was no joke. And they had to learn them quickly. And we were shooting them all within like 2 days. And each number had these fabulous costumes designed by Linda Stokes, who did all those costumes for Missy Elliott and Busta Rhymes and Janet and what's it gonna be, and all those that Linda Stokes, like she was major. So every scene was if you remember the movie, was a different fabulous like costume. And one of them, they're wearing these bubble wrap outfits. And one of them, they're wearing these patent leather sexy nun outfits. I mean, the costumes were like amazing. So it was a big deal, these 2 days of production numbers. And we go to this rehearsal to see them to check on the progress, where they do a little presentation. And it was heartbreaking to see Gene sort of really stumbling through this choreography. It was just really, it was just sad. It was really heartbreaking. And, ultimately, and we were talking about it after, and I told Marguerite, listen, we ultimately I said, I'm going to leave the choice up to you what to do here, because you know him, and you see how he's like. You've been with him, you've gone through this with him in the past, so you have to tell me if you think he can pull it off. I'll trust your judgment, but you tell me. And she didn't feel comfortable enough to stake it on him, and so we had to fire him. And it was really sad. And of course, I don't know exactly how many years later he passed away. But that was a really sad experience, But that is how Rodney came to the thing. We were literally filming club scenes at the El Rey. I think I pushed the performance scenes to like a little bit to give us a little time. And in the middle of filming club scenes, Marguerite had Rodney come down and she introduced me to him. He read a little something for me. And then I said, so Marguerite, Marguerite, you're vouching that he'll be able to get all this choreography like really quickly and stuff. And she's like, oh yeah, no problem. And I was like, I think I said something like, okay, give me a little step, give me something, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Rodney goes, and just turns it out. And that's how Rodney came to play Miss Dominique in Punks. And then out of that experience, Rodney and I became fast friends. And to this day, he's one of my dearest friends. And so while we were doing Noah's Ark, I created the role of Alex for Rodney, because by that time I really knew his personality and everything he could do. And I thought that character needs to be somewhere, because that's just who Rodney was. And everyone loved him because he was such a warm, bubbly, naturally funny personality. And so I wrote that character for him. Noah was kind of a Carrie Bradshaw, I guess, to an extent, but not really. What it really was I decided very specifically that Noah needed to be effeminate because at the time there was this sort of, you know, there was this sort of growing feeling of flamboyant being bad. You know what I mean? Even within the gay Black community, there was this real growing sentiment of like, Queenie is bad, and why can't you just be right? Why can't we be, you know, masculine? What about the masculine gay men? It was all of that, right? Masculine being sort of valued over everything else. And so I wanted to push against that by having the lead of this show be this unapologetically flamboyant, fabulous gay man. You know, which was a little bit of a challenge for Daryl, because if you know Daryl in real life, he's kind of a regular guy. He's not Noah. So he had to kind of find the character, which he did very well. And, you know, there needed to be a whore. There always has to be a whore. There just has to be. Every friend group has one or two or three or four. So there just has to be one. You know, it is what it is. Especially on a gay show, there has to be at least one. But again, unapologetic about his shit. But again, also the one who underneath it all probably feels emotion the most, you know, like all of those sort of complexities. And then Chance was modeled after my best friend in life, who I met in college, who is this smartest person I know, graduated, you know, what's the highest? Summa cum laude? Is that the highest? Summa cum laude from Princeton, you know, got his PhD from Princeton, summa cum laude, all that stuff. Is now a tenured professor of political science. But again, it was about wanting to represent the people that I knew. You know, the other thing about Noah's Ark was I wanted it to be aspirational. I wanted young Black gay men to see what was possible with their lives. That was the goal. So I wanted them to see Black gay men who had careers and jobs and ambitions and businesses. Chance was a college professor because my best friend was a college professor. This was a real person. Ricky owned a clothing store because I knew people who, this guy has a clothing store in Melrose or whatever. Alex is working in, you know, the health and medical field, pushing HIV because, you know, there's Phil Wilson over here. People, you know, we're doing it for ourselves. Noah, of course, was a writer because I'm a writer, and that's what I know. I know that lifestyle. I know what it's like, and I wanted to show that. I wanted to see, you know, the central premise really for all of my work, it is, yes, telling Black gay stories, but if you boil it down to, you know, even smaller, it's wanting to see myself on screen. That's what it has always been about. Growing up, never seeing myself and wanting to see myself. That is what these 20 years of making movies and television has been about for me. So that's how Noah kind of all came together. And that's really what it was. That's really what it was about. I honestly never intended or expected it to make it to television. I always thought this will be independent. It'll be a struggle. I'll do it episode by episode and, you know, and see what I can make happen. It's like the Tyler Perry model. You know, I'm going to scrape together money and put these plays on, and maybe I'll lose my shirt, but maybe I'll become a billionaire, you know. I didn't know what would happen, but it's sort of like, as an artist, you just kind of, you know, you're creating. As an artist, you create. And as a Black artist, gay artist, you create however you can create. I was just creating however I could create using the resources I had access to and that I could pull together to make it happen.
Wow. So, man, that was an amazing story and very personal. I think you really took to heart what your mentor said in the very beginning of your career, is to write about what you're familiar with. We've got some really good news about Noah's Ark, and that you released this week about this reunion special that is going to be taking place next month. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I mean, there's never, like, the fans have never stopped sort of wanting more of that show. So we hear from them all the time, literally all the time. And What people don't know is I've been busy behind the scenes for years trying to get a reboot mounted, in the Viacom universe. And it's been a roller coaster. And I was working more recently with a white gay producers, one of whom used to be like the president of MTV. So I thought, well, they can help. We can make this happen, because they actually reached out to me and said, have you thought about it? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do it. So, for a few years we were trying and going through these different iterations and meetings and different sort of versions of the project, only to sort of finally hit a sort of cement wall about a year ago or whatever. So, and I've been busy working. Did Being Mary Jane. I wrote the finale, which aired last year. P-Valley, I'm a co-exec producer on, which premieres next month on Stars. Make sure you watch that. That has some amazing Black LGBTQ characters that you will not want to miss. I think it was one of those gay white producers, it was Dave Mace, who was formerly a high level executive at Logo. So he had worked there on the Noah's Ark stuff, so he was very passionate about the show. He called me up and said, hey, I just want to put a bug in your ear. I don't know if you've seen like a lot of shows have been doing, like, while we all been shut down, have been doing, reunions and kind of getting cast together. And, I think maybe, I don't know if you thought about doing something like that with Noah, but, just an idea. And so I started thinking about it. And then I was like, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's just do an original episode. When then I saw like Parks and Recreation did like an original episode set during COVID. And I thought, oh, let's do that. Let's just go for it. And because I'd been developing reboots, already had some ideas of where the characters were. So it was just a case of, okay, let's put this together. And then the Black Lives Matter protest kicked up again. And so that kind of changed things a little bit, because I was writing it set during the COVID shutdown. And then there's this extra angle to add. So now we also address that. So that's kind of how it came about, really. It's a love letter to the fans. It's to let people know kind of where the characters are 10 years later. But it's also, it's also sort of for the powers that be to see, like, this is what this show is, and this is why it was ahead of its time 15 years ago, and was, cut off, canceled way too soon. But since we're having all these conversations about Black Lives Matter and Black LGBTQ Lives Matter and all this stuff, and while you're all out there rebooting Will and Grace and Queer as Folk and L Word and everything else, hey, what about Noah's Ark? So the hope is that also, because I think we'll have a large viewership, that people will, the powers that be will hear, and maybe we can actually get an official reboot going. So, yeah.
All right.
Well, but it's gonna be amazing. I also have to say there'll be a lot of big surprises that people will want to see. There will be some amazing guest appearances and stuff. You will not want to miss it, for sure.
We're definitely looking forward to seeing that. I want to go back to a project that I kind of call that your first love, and that is Blackbird. The film came out a couple of years back, starring Monique and Isaiah Washington and a very young, impressionable Julian Walker, I believe is his last name. And just wanted to talk about that film, because I think that film represented the experiences of so many people that were coming to terms with their sexuality, the things that they experience when trying to find themselves, religion, relationships, that whole matter. So let's talk about the inspiration behind that. I believe that was based off of a book that you had read in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I went to college in Boston, and I knew I was gay from a young age, and in Mississippi, I knew this is not something that, I can sort of trumpet and run around screaming at the top of my lungs. But I also, at a certain point, I knew that I will escape this state. I knew I will leave Mississippi when I finished high school, I'm out. And ended up, you know, getting accepted to colleges all over the country, Ivy League and not, and settling on Brandeis University because I got a full scholarship, and you know, I did not come from money, so that was, and it was a good school, so I was like, okay, free ride, I'm there. And I remember getting on the plane in Jackson, Mississippi to fly up to Boston. And as the plane took off and I looked out, you know, and saying goodbye to Mississippi, I said to myself, when I step off this plane, every person that I meet from this day forward will know that I am gay. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why it came, but that's what I thought as I looked out that plane window and I flew to Boston. And I remember, because Brandeis is sort of just outside the city, 20-minute train ride. And we go into the, you know, get on the train and go into Boston to shop and whatnot. And I remember going into Harvard Square, going to the Co-op, the big bookstore. And just walking around and then being stunned. I remember asking if they had any sort of books by gay authors, because I was the kid. I remember my high school English teacher saying at the end of the 11th grade, and she happened to be this Black woman that lived down the street from where I grew up. I was friends with her son when we were kids. And I was the only Black kid in the AP English class. And I remember her telling me, she said, "You're the most likely to ask, was that author gay?" Because most of them were. And so I go in and I ask, do they have any books by any gay authors? And I go, and there was one shelf, you know, it was wider than that. So one shelf that was gay and lesbian. And I remember looking at the shelf, and there was one book that I could see had Black skin on the spine. So the illustration had Black skin. And I pull it out, and it was Blackbird by Larry Duplechan. And I buy it. I'm sitting on the train. I'm devouring it. I think I finished it probably that night. It's this amazing, lovely coming of age story set in the 70s in like a small town in California. This Black boy, very religious, devout religious Christian, you know, choir boy, really believes and really struggling with his sexuality. And his friends are also all kind of cracking under the weight of the pressure of this sort of small conservative California town. And so I fell in love with the story and I thought this is a story I would love to see. And I was also teaching myself screenwriting at the time. So I thought, oh, I'll write this as a script. And so that was the first script I wrote, was my adaptation of Blackbird, which I wrote in college. And so I set it though in Mississippi, and I set it present day, because I just thought, you know, Mississippi today, this story would still be relevant and back in the 90s. And just made it a little more, you know, I sort of veered it a little more in the direction of that setting. But the heart of the story is all Larry Duplechan. And he wrote it's a series of books that follow that character through adulthood. So if there's anybody that's interested in looking for something good to read, go back and get the Larry Duplechan books. He's got about 8 or 9 of them, and they're all amazing. So yeah, it was just this sort of, it was such an important moment for me as a young gay man to suddenly, that was the first time that I experienced, you know, knowingly, a work of art by a Black gay man, if you know what I mean. That was really the first time. Yeah, it was really important. And I felt a kinship with Randy in the book, Randall in the book, Randy in the movie. But again, no one was going to make that movie. It was never going to happen. So that sat on a shelf while I did all this other stuff, years and years and years. And then after I'd made The Skinny, which was another independent film that I did before Blackbird, and The Skinny came about because I did Noah's Ark, 2 seasons of Noah's Ark and the movie. Right out of that, I sold 2 shows. One was a Black Desperate Housewives kind of show to BET, and one was Logo had approached me and said, we want to do a spinoff of Noah's Ark. So I spent a year developing these 2 shows, and then neither one of them got made. So again, I was like, fuck Hollywood. Let me go do something quickly because, my relevance is waning. So I quickly put The Skinny together, wrote that script in about a week and shot it. And so I had done The Skinny and finished that. And then I was trying to figure out what's next. And a producer I had worked with hit me up and said, hey, I've got this guy, he's coming out of the music industry and he's got money and he's looking for a film project. He's gay white guy. Do you have anything that you think he might find interesting? And I thought about it and I was like, well, there's always Blackbird. Gave her Blackbird and the producer responded to it. It was like, he loves it. He wants to do it. So suddenly we had the budget. We had someone writing a check. And so next thing you know, I'm off to Mississippi to my hometown to make this movie, which was a really amazing experience because it was like, I'm a hometown boy. So first of all, it was just great because I know everybody. So the mayor at the time I knew. I went to high school with his daughter. The chief of police and the sheriff, my cousin is a judge in our hometown now, so it's just like anything I wanted to do, I could shoot anywhere. I shot at the high school. I shot at a beautiful theater in downtown. I shot, but it was amazing to see my hometown community kind of embrace this film project and offered it and offered me all kinds of help and assistance. And it was just really, it was an amazing experience being able to create that film in my hometown with, 2 of my favorite actors, Monique and Isaiah Washington. And then just to discover this young Black Mississippi gay boy at University of Southern Mississippi, never acted before, always kind of inside kind of wanted to do it, but never really had an opportunity, never really had anybody say, hey, so the whole kind of collective experience was really amazing to sort of finally see that vision come to life 20 years later or whatever it was. And I'm very proud of that film. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to ask, you've been at this for a very long time. You have worn numerous hats as writer, director, producer, as you just mentioned, executive producer on Being Mary Jane, as well as P-Valley, which is coming out, like you said, next month. What lessons have you learned? What is the biggest lesson that you've learned from this journey that maybe you can share with our audience that could inspire, the next generation of LGBTQ content creators?
Well, I would pass along the same information that, Ricky Beetle Blair gave to me when I was in my early 20s, which was write the story that only you can tell, write the story that only you can tell, because that's the story that you know the best. That doesn't mean write your story. That doesn't mean literally write your story. Not everybody's story is interesting. I don't know that my story would be all that interesting in a movie, but certainly elements of my story I can borrow from, and I have, but write what you know. That is, I think, the main thing. And the other thing I would say, if I could tell my younger self anything as an artist, it would probably be, one, I would say write more, just write a hell of a lot more. And 2, just to overcome the fear a lot as early as you can, as soon as you can. Because the fear does kind of slow you down, it slows you down. Yeah.
Well, Patrik-Ian Polk, thank you so very much for sharing some very personal stories, for sharing your journey with us. Again, this is all part of AAFCA Presents Pride 2020. And we've just been celebrating stories within the community that have inspired us, and yours definitely has inspired us. The stories that you've written yourself have also inspired us. The characters, the plots, the drama of it all has all inspired us, and we thank you so very much for your contribution to our story as Black gay people in this country. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. This is actually a really nice interview.